Good day, Senator Fonfara, Representative Horn, Representative Cheeseman, Senator Martin, and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Axel Carrion, and I'm the Vice President of State Public Affairs for UPS, representing the largest Teamster employer in the country and our over 5,000 Teamsters servicing the more than 15,000 businesses across the state. I also serve as the chairman of the board for the Motor Transport Association of Connecticut, which represents over 500 member companies throughout the state, mostly comprised of small businesses. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to submit this testimony in support of HB 5290 enact sunsetting the highway use tax. I did submit my written testimony, but if I may, I'd just like to focus on some key points that were made during this hearing relating to the cost evasion and competitive balance of this tax. So first on the cost, I'd just like to say, as was mentioned before, Connecticut is now one of only 5 states that has such a scheme, and that includes New York, Kentucky, New Mexico, and Oregon. So what we've found so far since this has been put together is that the cost of this specific Connecticut highway use tax is disproportionate and significantly more expensive than the other highway use taxes that exist across the country. So I'll look just to New York, for example, and we're paying right now 3 times more per mile than we are in our neighboring state of New York in the highway use tax, 3 times more per mile. So even if you agree with the highway use tax, this highway use tax in itself is very disproportionate to the neighboring state. As far as the evasion, that's a key piece because a lot of focus has been placed on out-of-state truckers. And I'd just like to place the emphasis back on the in-state trucking companies, because those are the Connecticut businesses, those are the Connecticut jobs that are important to us. So in regards to the evasion, one study that was conducted on the highway use tax showed that there was a 45 to 53% evasion, highly driven by out-of-state trucking companies. A follow-up study was done 10 years later. And I'm sorry, the first number was 32 to 44%. I apologize, 32 to 44%. That number 10 years later went up to 45 to 53%. And it's simple economics. As out-of-state trucking companies face more pressure on their bottom line, they are more likely to then underreport on their miles, which leads to not only less revenue for the highway use tax, but also an IFTA revenue. So I'll just conclude with this. When we initially passed this through the state, we did not know that Rhode Island would be overturned. We did not know that we would get this infusion of money from the federal government. And we did not know that this highway use tax would be 3 times more than the neighboring state. But we know this now. So I asked the committee before me to please just consider where we are in the state of economics now and consider this highway use tax to be repealed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. And just a quick question. We've talked about the impact on the trucking companies and their bottom line, but I believe you said you represented the Teamsters.
Yes, I do.
So
No, I'm sorry, I don't represent the Teamsters. I represent UPS, the largest Teamster employer.
Okay.
Yes.
So what would be the effect, in terms of employment? Should these trucking companies have to spend so much more money on the tax as opposed to expanding their businesses?
Well, thank you, Representative, for that question. And it really comes down to investment. And I think, Representative, you mentioned earlier about companies leaving the state. And the question is also about investment within the state. So when we look at growing jobs, this is going to be very significant into the equation that we look into. So if we take a look at the specific impact of these jobs, a tractor trailer driver, for example, at UPS, that tractor trailer driver with 4 years on the job on average in a high school diploma is making $112,000 per year. And that's before the $50,000 in other compensation with healthcare and pension. So these are real jobs. So when we think about this tax, we have to strongly consider what kind of future investment will companies have in Connecticut with this kind of tax and just a disproportionate amount in Connecticut itself. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman. Representative Claritas DiTrio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for testifying today. My question, do you have an estimate of what this will cost UPS if this tax is imposed? I don't know if I heard that.
Yeah, I don't have the estimate as far as total numbers. I can tell you it's 3 times more per mile than New York. So we do drive less miles than we do in New York.
Mhm.
But if you calculate just the per mile, that equation comes out to 3 times more than what we're paying in New York.
And do you know what you're paying in, did you say what you're paying in New York?
No,
No?
I don't have those numbers on me. It's just,
You
it, we
can get
we
them.
look at a per mile
Okay,
basis.
okay. Thank
Yes,
you very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Senator Maroney has a question online. And Senator Maroney, maybe this is the one way you can track me down after trying for the last 3 days.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Fonfara. So my question is, you keep citing the fact that the Connecticut use tax is 3 times higher than the New York state use tax, but are you taking into account the fact that New York has tolls and a higher gas tax? So are you paying more per mile total in Connecticut than you would in New York? Or when you look at the totality, my assumption would be New York, you're still paying more than you are to Connecticut.
Sure. Thank you for the question. It was an apples to apples of highway use tax to highway use tax.
Great. So then you're not considering the fact that New York has tolls, a significant cost to go over either the Tappan Zee or the George Washington Bridge, as well as a higher gas tax. So
No, I'm not
you're
looking at
paying-
tolls or fuel tax or other, wages, things of that nature, specifically the highway use tax, apples to apples. And I should also mention that New York is actually looking at repealing their highway use tax at this time. So
Are
there's
they going to remove the tolls though? Because you'll
that as
still be
well.
paying the tolls.
Senator Maroney, could you repeat your question?
No, I think even if they, I guess it was more of a comment than a question, that even if they do repeal their highway use tax, you would still be paying tolls and fees to use the roads in New York, a user tax for using the roads there.
We're at stalemate here, so.
I'm sorry, was there a question? I thought he.
No, there wasn't
I
a
thought he
question.
said it
Thank
was-
you. I'm all set. Thank you.
Don't have.
No.
You don't have to. Okay, great. Senator Maroney, any other questions?
No, thank you. Thank you, Senator Fonfara.
Thank you.
Representative Barry, Mr. Carry on. Representative Barry has a question. Please prepare
I thought I was
yourself.
relieved. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I'm always causing trouble. You said that New York was thinking of repealing theirs. Do you know the reasons why?
My understanding is the evasion rates is a big part of the consideration.
Do you know what the collectability is in New York?
I believe it was between 40 and 50% evasion rates in New York.
Okay, thank you. I think now you can leave.
I'll double check and make sure Senator Fonfara says so.
Representative Barry, I guess if staying here all day through every public hearing and meeting causes trouble, I wish we had a lot more trouble among members. Mr. Carrion, I'm a little bit confused when you say about this tax is anti-competitive, it hurts truckers. And I agree, the trucking, having a job in trucking is a fantastic opportunity for those who enjoy driving, those that want to be independent. But if you have a state, and you mentioned specifically New York, that has tolls, that has other fees, and has a highway user tax, irrespective of what level it is, it has one. We don't have those other things. So how is it that we're at a competitive disadvantage versus New York?
Sure. And I would say that New York is not the model that I would say as far as from a competitive point of view. There's also other surrounding states. There's Pennsylvania. There's other states that from a logistics perspective, we look at from a competitive balance. So when I say respect to competitive balance, it's a regional. When I mention New York, it's an opportunity just to learn from what we've seen from the highway use tax in New York. So I bring up New York, not necessarily because there's a greater balance within New York from a cost model, but more just from the lessons learned from the highway use tax within New York.
Right, but aren't we Don't we have the competitive advantage because we don't have those other taxes on your drivers?
I would say the Northeast is a challenge, generally speaking. So I don't have the numbers specifically on our costs in Connecticut versus New
But just
York.
common sense. If we don't have tolls, if we don't have the other tax that you mentioned, we have a higher user fee now. Seems to me we're at a irrespective of how you feel about this tax. I'm saying, aren't we at a competitive advantage vis-a-vis a state, and virtually every other state in the Northeast has tolls? It seems to me that, and I don't know if it's adequate enough. I don't think it is to maintain our highway system and our roads in Connecticut. There hasn't been support yet for tolls. I mean, at some point, that, you know, those chickens are going to come home to roost. But you did cite New York, and you say the Northeast is not, is a challenge. And it just seems to me that maybe we're the state that people would want to drive through as opposed to the other states that you say are, people are evading Connecticut. Drivers are evading Connecticut. Where do they go if everywhere else around is higher than we are?
So Senator Fanfara, I would say that as far as our organization, and I think in the industry in general, we have not been against paying more when we need to for the roads and bridges. We've been supportive, UPS has in the past, raising the federal fuel tax. We've been supportive before raising registration fees. So as far as paying more, it's not a matter of not wanting to pay more. We will pay more, especially when that money goes toward roads and bridges. That makes our job a lot easier. We're able to service our customers. I think the question here is the mechanism that's being used. It's this highway use tax specifically. So we're supportive of making sure that we have funds that support our roads and bridges. But as far as the mechanism that's being used, we're opposed to the Connecticut highway use tax, the way it's being applied today. There's a lot of other expenses as well. As was mentioned, there's a monthly reporting. There's also third-party additional expenses that are related to the highway use tax, especially in organizations large as ours. And there's also additional investments that have to be made with the technology within our system, within our vehicles, telematics upgrades, the different technologies that you have to upgrade to also make sure from a compliance perspective that your reports are accurate as far as mileage reporting and other related requirements from the actual tax. So there are other expenses from the tax that aren't just specifically from a per mile basis. There's also additional investments that have to be made.
Lastly, did your organization, did your company take a position on tolls in Connecticut when it was before us?
We did.
Can you tell us what that was?
We oppose the tolls.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Paletta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologize for going after you, of course. Very quickly, I just wanted to chime in. Number one, I represent Watertown, which has a large UPS facility, a great partner with our community. And I think I need to mention here that a couple of years ago, we passed a bill in the legislature that would otherwise help those re-entering into society after previously being incarcerated to actually get a job. And one of the industries was your industry. I was proud to support that bill. It was a bipartisan bill. My fear with this tax that I think is somewhat discriminatory, that it may negate what we did 2 years ago. But I won't talk about that right now because I know it's for a different day. The question I have, and if you could very briefly explain it, how this tax adversely impacts your industry, but maybe not another industry that would be in the same, again, we've been hearing this 1,200 businesses across the state of Connecticut. You are one of the 1,200 businesses. Is that the same in other states? Because we've heard that it's been repealed in like 20 other states. So was it repealed for the reason that it was a discriminatory tax?
Well, I can't get into the individual 21 states, but what I will say collectively is what the states recognize is that it placed a significant more burden on the in-state trucking companies versus out of state. So when you look at it, the highway use tax, initially you're trying to capture out-of-state truckers. But the more that continue to evade the system, the more of the burden is being put on in-state trucking companies. So when we look at repeal across the nation of those 21 states, that's a significant factor that goes into the equation when they see at the end of the day, it's hurting their in-state businesses more than what they're trying to do by capturing out-of-state revenue.
And I will just end with this. I think there's a shared goal on this committee to properly fund transportation, our special transportation fund. And as you alluded to, I don't think there's one person that will deny the fact that we need to improve our roads across the state of Connecticut. I mean, there's so many bottlenecks in so many areas. And I think the governor identified 25 or 30 projects a couple of years ago that they wanted to tackle. And there's no disputing that. The question is, how do we raise funds in a fair manner? And your industry seems to be getting hit harder than others, and that's a little concerning to me. Thank you.
And thank you. And we would agree with that assessment that we do agree that we want to pay for our roads and bridges. We just want to do it in a sensible way that makes sense and protects small businesses throughout the state of Connecticut. And we are more than willing to have that conversation and sit down at the table and what makes sense for everyone.
Anyone else? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Michael Ritchie.